everybody. I believe we are live now, so welcome to the Co-Collective Creative 3. This is our third edition of this. The topic this evening is consciousness and wherever that takes us. That is a massive beast of a topic, so I assembled the most incredible minds in the multiverse here to help me tackle that. And if you don't mind, guys, let's go around and do a couple of introductions. Just tell folks who you are and where they can find you. I'm going to link all the ways to find you in the description for this event, but feel free to do it in your own words. You know what? Bob Davis, man. Dr. Bob Davis. It's good to see you, brother. Tell us who you are,
good to see you.
What you about.
Good to see you, and thanks for the invitation. Very quickly, I'm a retired neuroscientist. My website is bobdavidspeaks.com. I'm currently in pre-production on a documentary on consciousness called Consciousness Connection. Based on that book, Unseen Forces, Deprivation of Science, Reality, and You. We have a lot of experts involved in it and experiencers and trying to make sense of it. Not that we have the answer, because nobody does. But nevertheless, I saw two orange over the night sky in Sedona, Arizona. So I wrote the book, The UFO Phenomenon. Then I had a near-death experience 2 years later. So I wrote the book, Life After Death, Analysis of the Evidence. Then I had a Kundalini experience, which led me to writing the last book, The Unseen Forces. And now doing a documentary based on that book. So it's an evolving process down the rabbit hole that we're all involved in. And I know Brent very well, and he's a professional of them all as far as consciousness and beyond goes, the paranormal, etc. He's the guru that I go to for answers, and nobody has the answer. But he's extraordinarily knowledgeable about this. And he worked with me on Free. We published an article in the Journal of Scientific Exploration based on interactions of 3,200 people with non-human entities associated with the UAP. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that. So I'm all over the place.
We love it. We will absolutely talk about that, man. So Dr. Bob Davis, thank you so much, brother. Brent Rains, he already set you up there, man. So you just want to mow those down or what?
Yeah, he set me up all right. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Sound great.
All right, good. There's my book, John A. Keel, A Reason for Me Getting into the Field, back 55 years ago. I wrote that book. I wrote two others, Visitors from Hidden Realms and On the Edge of Reality, and Dealing with UFOs, but in the process, not just nuts and bolts ET, but also a lot of consciousness. To me, the scientists need to look at consciousness and physics and how they may interconnect with quantum physics, parapsychology, all the mixed bag. And there's a lot to unpack here. So I won't go on any further with that, because there's a whole panel here to discuss this, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of back and forth going on. So thank you.
Yeah, especially with this group, man. Brent, thank you so much for joining us, dude. Let's go with Lynn Miller, formerly Lynn Miller, Lynn Stevens now.
Yes,
Lynn, how are you?
I'm doing great. Well, I've been, in education for a pretty good while, and right now I'm an art teacher. I teach elementary through 8th grade art, so I love that. Just love seeing the creative process. As Brandon showed you, me and Dr. Barbara Mangro wrote a book called Convergence, the Interconnection of Extraordinary Experiences. And basically, through most of my life, I've had out-of-body experiences. Early on, they were spontaneous, and I'd say around 2006, I had this big paradigm shift with What the Bleep Do We Know and The Secret and the Law of Attraction. And that just pretty much just started it all. I started meditating, and then I was able to have controlled out-of-body experiences. And it just, I have seen a lot of non-human intelligent beings, what I believe to be extraterrestrials, and all kinds of things. So it's been wonderful and amazing. And that's about it. And I'm just so glad to be here.
We're glad you're here. It's so cool.
Thank you.
And congratulations on the new hubby. Way to lock one down. Nice job.
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
All right. Dr. Jenny Martin, you actually just had an episode on my show, and I'm grateful. We had an awesome conversation and asked you to join us for this, and here you are. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. That was fun. And what great company. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the last person here. But My background is in psychology. I went through doctorate in psychology, but I found that there was so much that I had experienced personally that I didn't show up in school. And so I began my own journey in terms of looking at suppressed scripture in mystical Christianity, and also looking at physics of all things to understand how things that I experienced viscerally but weren't taught in my schooling. And so I've been fascinated with that whole field, and now I get to actually share that information in classes that I run. So I'm grateful to be here.
Hell yeah. The psychedelic cervix, y'all check it out. It is super cool. It is absolutely fascinating, and you're wonderful. Thank you again for joining us. Pat Mahan, what is up, dude?
Hello, what's up, man? Can you hear me?
Yes, sound great.
How's everybody doing?
Fantastic.
Good. My name is Pat Mahan. I'm the host of the Like Attracts Like podcast, and I also facilitate the Like Attracts Like Evolution conscious mentorship platform. And I've had some interesting experiences from all different variations of consciousness, I would imagine, from the lowest, most unconscious, painful, suffering aspect of awareness that I could imagine to some of what I would gather as far as a human is concerned, some of the more higher conscious, unified unity aspects of being as close to whatever I could imagine a source to be as possible. So I've experienced many different levels from all across the grid, formed my own questions, and then tried to do my own self kind of inner inquiry to figure out what I felt for me was happening here. And then using that kind of that outline to see where all of the other projections lie, meaning the things that I hold to the core are there is a source, there's awareness, and then there is either a projection or creative expression. And if I break everything down to those three things, I can kind of look and make sense, as much sense as I can, of many of the stories and many of the different ideologies and teachings. So like I have a blast with that. And I also find that I can help to use that to help other people get out of their egoic identification of their kind of confined conscious experience to kind of liberate them in a sense.
Now, I will say about Pat, you are the guy that I go to when I'm in my funks, man. I've said this before because I love the hell out of you, dude. Like attracts like, guys. Check out his show. Of course, linked all kinds of ways to find his links, but could not just be more grateful for you, brother. So thank you so much.
I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, and we've talked about that. I was like, man, I come to you in my funks. He's like, yeah, I get that a lot. And so people come to you like an astrologer when they need answers, right? We're just like, dude, fix my shit. All right, I wanted to introduce Carlos Tanner. Carlos, what's up, man?
Oh man, a lot actually, but thank you again, man. This is such a cool group of people. I already feel like we don't have enough time, but because I want to like listen to all of you as well. I'm the director of the Ayahuasca Foundation. We are located in Iquitos, Peru, in the Amazon rainforest. I work with indigenous healers called curanderos, and we've been operating that center for over 12 years now. It's centered around an initiation course that I designed after living with my first teacher, the shaman named Don Juan Tangoa, in his house with his family from 2004 to 2008. And I obviously need to write a book because apparently that's like what you all do. But yeah, we hosted research the last 5 years, funded by the British Medical Research Council, which showed some really promising results that I wasn't surprised about, but at least it was shown like in the language of modern medicine. And that's what I feel is my passion, to try to translate the ancestral paradigm into an understandable way for the modern paradigm to integrate it into our society, especially with regard to healing. And so I'm very focused on consciousness, which I think should be at the forefront of our understanding of healing, especially, but also of reality in general. So it's a pleasure to be here.
It's so cool. And Carlos, as the director of the Ayahuasca Foundation, a buddy of ours, you may notice our friend and producer, Beau, is not with us. He's actually at Carlos's center right now. So he is on his own first time to ever do anything like this. And I'm so excited for him. Yeah. And actually, we're doing a really cool thing that I'll go ahead and tell everybody about now. We had the idea. So when Beau wanted to do this initially, I was like, well, I know some people out in the sticks in Texas, like where I did it, but I go, dude, I know Carlos Tanner, like just go there, right? The first government funded ayahuasca study in Iquitos, Peru. You can't get more legit. This is where, Zac Efron filmed is Down to Earth, right? Yeah. And so, not just because of that, but I mean, if you need that credibility, I mean, that's how you do it. So he actually said, yeah, let's do that. Found a, synchronistically, probably, not by accident, somebody canceled. He got into an earlier spot than he'd planned. We are actually doing a before and after episode, just not out yet. He just got there today. So we're going to show from his transformation. Carlos was kind enough to join us for that. So it's all three of us sitting there, and Carlos gives his first counseling session to Beau, and we walk through why Beau's doing this in the first place, what he can expect. We, laughed that piranhas aren't as big of a concern as we all thought they were, and I'm sure Carlos will tell you about that. And so also we're going to do a follow-up for when he comes back, and Carlos works with him with his integration, and Carlos is going to join us for that also. So it's a really cool thing that we're doing here, and we're very happy for Beau, and Carlos, thanks again for your help with that, man.
Yeah, no worries. I'm excited about it. I think it's super cool.
It's so
And just to like match up with what I've been hearing already, the core of the indigenous traditions of shamanism are plant spirit medicine, so we work very closely with the spirits of trees and plants and also ancestors and also extraterrestrials. I did a really cool series way back in the day where I interviewed a lot of different curanderos or shaman, and every single one of them said that they work with extraterrestrials. And I have had my own experiences with them.
That's so cool. We need to talk about that more in a minute. Okay, another incredible author here, actually. So yes, Carlos, get on that book. I want to hold yours up next. Mark Gober. Now, I'm going to just set this up real quick. So Mark Gober, I heard your book after just hearing tons of great things about it. I got the end to Upside Down Thinking. I've got it. And so you came on, made my damn day, by the way. Sent me... these two signed, your other two books, absolutely amazing, and thank you so much, dude. All of which, of course, guys, linked in the show notes. But, dude, you're working on something new, and thank you so much for joining us. Mark Gober, everybody.
Brandon, thanks again for having me. My background is in business. I used to do investment banking in New York and then worked in Silicon Valley advising tech companies. Very mainstream thinker, pretty much nihilist, agnostic / atheist for most of my life. And then in 2016 was listening to podcasts, came across things that led me down a research path and changed my whole life. So since then I've been writing. I've also produced a podcast series in 2019. But the centerpiece around all the books is the idea that consciousness is not produced by the brain, and looking at scientific evidence for that. The second book, An End to Upside Down Living, is on the awakening journey. The third book is on politics and economics as applied to these ideas of consciousness. And the new one that's coming out next month is An End to Upside Down Contact, which is on contact with non-human intelligence, abductions, UFOs, spirits, things like that. So I'm very interested in how consciousness is related to all of this and look forward to the discussion.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much again. I'm just so fanboyed out on all of y'all, by the way. I just love you guys. So this is so cool for me. And then we have a surprise guest that we were speaking yesterday, and I was like, Mira, come hang out with us. Mira Taylor, everybody.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mira Taylor. I'm an integrative therapist and subconscious medium, which I basically utilize in session with my clients. I let them share the space with me in a transcendent sense and help them explore the self in a way that feels like a third-party perspective to them, which most of my clients don't know, except for the ones that really know me well. Most of them think they're just in talk therapy. But that is how I utilize my gift in session work that I do. Please all give me your good vibe, writer energy. I'm on page 88, word 22,000 something. And trying to continue on my best with my first book. So I'm very happy to be here and be sharing in wonderful conversation and holding rapport with all of these amazing minds that have made some huge accomplishments more than once in life. Writing a book is something each one of you should be incredibly proud of.
It's amazing. And we're going to save her UFO theory for Mark, for Bob, for Brent, for everybody afterwards, because we've thought a lot about this. So Mira and I have these like hours long conversations that I wish I recorded, but I don't. And so she really intellectually
we should just start doing that.
Yeah. And she really intellectually challenges all. And so I'm really excited that all of you are here. Thank you so much. So, Mark, you've already touched on the fact that consciousness does not start in the brain. So let me ask you this. Is there a biological basis for consciousness that we know of?
Well, Science Magazine has asked this question in their 125th edition. They listed the top 25 questions remaining in all of science. And the second one is, what is the biological basis of consciousness? So the question presumes that there is a biological basis of consciousness, that consciousness comes from biology. And what I would argue, based on the research that I've done and having talked to many people about this, is that biology plays a role in the way that we experience consciousness, but the origin is not from the body or from biology itself. So the body is almost like a vessel or a vehicle for consciousness, and it flows through biological organisms, for an example. So it's a total reverse of how I used to think about things, because I used to think about the body as the producer of consciousness, and when the body dies, there's no consciousness anymore because the body was producing it, and when it's dead, it's over. And now I think of the body as this more temporary stop for consciousness.
Yeah, that's a great way to put that. Mira, you're agreeing quite a bit. What do you think?
Yeah, I do agree wholeheartedly, honestly. There's an interesting correlation for me, because I work a lot with reflective patterns of the micro and macro relationships of things. And so I've been learning a lot recently about what's called the fourth phase of water, or the exclusionary zone, which basically shows how vessels or channels within aqueous solutions have something called a fourth phase that creates a sense of a channel through something. And so to me, consciousness is something that probably in its sort of more elemental archetypal nature is flowing or aqueous, or something that we are sort of within. And it just it makes a lot of sense to me what you're saying, and on a spiritual transcendent level, it's most of what I've experienced. For me to be able to share the space with someone is to open up a part of me as vessel to allow them to amalgamate and kind of share through my instrument, if you will. So it makes a lot of sense to me on both the physical, scientific, and the spiritual level.
And I've heard stories of contactees saying that the Greys refer to us as vessels. Brent Rains, what do you think that means? What does the Greys mean by saying that we're vessels? Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, I have. And I'm still puzzling over that one. But I think that a lot of these things are kind of like archetypal forms that, they could be actually energy beings, plasmoids, plasma-based life forms, whereas we're carbon-based, and they can be quite advanced from our perspective, and do things that easily that are more difficult for us. But they don't always necessarily cooperate in just revealing everything we want to know. I think they want us to perhaps push buttons and make us to try to perceive things and pursue our knowledge on our own to some extent, kind of like Star Trek's non-interference directive, perhaps. At least I hope that's the benign approach. But yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here, and a lot of people in the UFO field will tell you, well, there are certain ones anyway. We know that there's like 96 different civilizations visiting, or another group will tell you 70 something, or another one will tell you 20. I don't think that all of that is as clear. I think it's kind of subjective. But I think that there's a lot of areas to pursue here. The physics, the quantum theories, the also the consciousness, which with physics and consciousness, we're seeing a lot of interactions here. Non-local reality. They could be, some of this could be Earth-based, some of it could be from extraterrestrial sources. We really don't know precisely the source. We've just kind of, and I think sometimes they lie to us about that. And maybe they have their reasons. But anyway.
Well, I can tell you from working with clients, we lie to ourselves all the time. So that's not surprising.
Yeah, I think some extent we project, a lot of things too. We think it's them saying it, but really it's it opens us up. But then we have to, we go through these different experiences, and sometimes it's hard to tell which is us and which is them.
1,000%. I have, micro, macro correlated to them to the gray matter in my brain. So it's interesting because from a consciousness perspective, from a neuroplastic perspective, the more gray matter you have in your brain, if we equate the mind of God to the universe in a sense, the more gray matter you have in your brain, the higher level of consciousness you have available to you as a physical vessel in this particular dimension and time space. So it's a fascination to me, only from the perspective that I also see there's like this constant stream of vilification that happens through the sort of more normative 3D realm as far as programming goes. But for me, I'm like, the more grays, the better. I want loads of gray up here. It's serving me very well. I'm sure it's serving a lot of you very well too, if you've written books.
Carlos.
Yeah, getting back to what Mark said, but also tying in Mira, because I think in your first comment you mentioned the fourth state of water. I love the model of consciousness and using water as a great reference because we're so familiar with it and its states and how those states have thresholds determined by frequency. And it makes sense to me that consciousness would be similar in that sense, maybe like it's not an either or, but kind of a both, in the sense that, the material, the matter of our biology is low frequency consciousness, but our emotions maybe are more like the liquid state or phase of consciousness, and our thoughts and our mind is the higher frequency, the gas state of consciousness. But all of it is consciousness. It's just which frequency it is, and that determines like whether or not it is in the solid state as our body, or the liquid state in our emotions, or the gas state of our minds, which correlates to me with the ideas and thoughts. And then when you feel them, they turn into beliefs. And then when we solidify them as truths, they become part of who we are. So there's like a way to view consciousness in that sense. But I'm also curious, Mark, if you've looked at the studies, maybe you have. I should read your books for sure, but I didn't know you existed until this panel. So I'm super grateful for that. But there are some really cool studies, and this also applies to what you just said, Mira. There are people who have had, and I'm probably not going to say this right, but neuroencephalitis, water on the brain. And so their brains didn't actually develop, and they have less than 5% of their brains. And yet they are intelligent human beings. And one of them was like a math professor who had less than 5% of his brain, like no brain, but yet clearly was conscious, had a lot of consciousness and a lot of intelligence. And so, to your point, Mark, like, yeah, I don't really think the brain has anything to do with it. And maybe it's not even the vessel, maybe it's not even the transistor of the radio, or maybe it's just far more complex. But if it were to be in the frequency realms, maybe that would also provide an explanation to make sense of those phenomena.
And consciousness is very discipline specific. You ask an anesthesiologist, will tell you consciousness comes in the form of a chemical called propofol. You ask a psychologist, consciousness is some cognitive aspect of psychological function, deductive reasoning, determining your own future, some higher order process. You ask a philosopher, you're going to get something else. We don't have an agreed upon definition of what consciousness is. So there's no right or wrong, but we see consciousness existing at every level of the physical universe and beyond. We see it at the subatomic level, where molecules communicate with each other in invisible pathways. We see this between humans in the form of ESP. We see this on a global scale with the Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University. I'm not going into detail about these experiments, but many of you, if not all of you, are aware of them. We see validation of ESP, that is real without question. Over 600 experiments done on 6,000 participants documenting that ESP is real. It's subtle effect, but it is real. Newtonian physics can't explain it, so it's not accepted in mainstream science, of course. But consciousness even exists beyond that. People can affect physical systems. Telekinesis is real. Again, it's subtle, but it does occur in varying ways. We see even cosmic consciousness, where people have out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and astral travel, and claim, report to interact with UFOs above, other dimensions, and beyond. And then we have some mathematically derived virtual reality theories, which talks about consciousness as well, but more in the form of an avatar, as if this is a programmed event life, a simulation reality, which many ascribe to. And in part, the documentary I'm working on now has many different experts and experiences, but from different disciplines that address it in different ways. So we lack the science, although there is some, and it is evolving, but it's not addressed, as we know, in academia. So it's a matter of how you define consciousness, and you're all touching upon it, a certain aspect of it, but there's a wide dynamic range of what I think consciousness is: information exchange. You can bang your head against the wall. What are you doing? You're getting information from the wall. Don't do it again. It's going to hurt you. So in effect, a wall is conscious, panpsychism. Everything is conscious in a sense, in that it exchanges information with you. The ultimate being human beings and maybe more advanced beings, but you get information, you derive it. How does your autistic child, a 4-year-old, speak 6 different languages? I know that to be a fact. How does a 6-year-old determine a cube root number, to the 7th decimal point in 7 seconds? I know that to be a fact. You can't explain that even on the basis of a quantum brain. There's an information field. That's an aspect of consciousness. An information field that is accessible, apparently, to some. That brings in the biology of the equation. But no doubt there's a symbiotic relationship between the brain and some external energy that somehow allows for consciousness to exist beyond the body, allows communication beyond the 3D body.
Well, let's definitely talk about beyond the body. But Jenny, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm totally in sync with what you're saying there, Bob, because what I've been interested in, I spent a lot of time talking with people that have all of these ESP abilities and all of these different experiences. And then you go to a college class and these things don't exist. They're just woo-woo, right? So I have been actually fascinated to go on, for instance, the Freedom of Information Act and 60-page document that declassed from the CIA from 1983, right, that talks about specific things that we're talking about here. And it shows that our government has, just like they were studying psychedelics long ago, right? But they were studying Ingo Swann, who could do the remote viewing and do these different things, but also they were putting people through the Monroe Institute, teaching them how to access these altered states. And this one document that I show in my classes, it talks about that we are not material beings and that the universe is holographic and torsion fields are behind all of it. And I find it's very fascinating that some of this research in Russia on torsion physics, this explains what Nikola Tesla was trying to do with his Philadelphia experiment, that we actually have the capability to go beyond time and space. And there's another person that's been really influential on my path named Claude Swanson, graduate from Princeton and MIT. He graduated and discovered that there's 2 physics. There is mainstream physics that he learned at Princeton in these schools. And then when he got hired by the government to do some classified work, he realized there's another physics going on. So he made it his career to actually, once he left doing some of that classified work, to document this for the average person, to explain things like, how does distance healing work? How do people in Chinese medicine heal at a distance and do all these different kinds of things? How does ESP work? And it all comes down to these torsion fields, that we are oscillating grids of energy, that these torsion fields can carry this information at a distance, time and space, that can go beyond time and space. And what gets me is that if us as individuals who are not part of any of these government programs, if we knew about this capability, we could be able to affect our reality in a way that most people are walking around completely feeling victimized by what's going on. And if you type in torsion into the Freedom of Information Act, the first thing that's going to pop up is psychotropic weapons. Why is this being suppressed so much? Because it's such powerful technology. It can be used for good and it can be used for evil. And when you realize that consciousness is these oscillating grids, if you want to control a whole population, there was a researcher named Valerie Hunt that worked on MKUltra and these different things. And she has said, give me enough money, give me the, what I need to make this happen. And I can make a whole city be angry. I can make a whole city be depressed. And it has to do with this torsional physics. And I just wish, as soon as I learned this, I realized, okay, witnessing my thoughts, what's going on with me? Is this really my feeling of anger or depression? Or is this possibly something that I'm being influenced? So it has given me a sense of empowerment to know this information. And I have a conviction that we are going to live in a time where people are going to take back their power, realize that we are far more powerful than we've ever been told. And this science is not going to be suppressed anymore, and it's going to be available for the average person so they can live life in a way that they're not victimized like most people feel right now.
Hell yeah. You got me fired up, Dr. Jenny. Pat, man, what do you think about all that?
I love what everyone is saying. And I guess, going to be challenging to articulate, I guess, but this all kind of started with the question is, like materialism is consciousness from the brain or from some physical mechanism, or is consciousness everything, right? Is it coming from the brain, or is the brain some kind of an antenna or some kind of an agency that works with consciousness to project it forward? And so I think like the way that I view this is, and the way that I want to say this is, I believe that we're doing our best as human beings with the language that we have to use the labels to try to describe things that we have no idea what we're talking about. And we don't know what we're talking about. And that's important. With all the education and that we have, we don't know what we're talking about. So when we say like conscious, there's consciousness, we're conscious, and then there's self-aware. And those are different things, all contained inside of the same thing. So I believe my cat is conscious. I believe it's conscious. I don't believe it's self-aware, but it's aware. We are aware of a self. That self doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. When you reach certain frequencies and levels of consciousness, which I'm just going to use consciousness and awareness as the same thing. I believe it's all one experience. So what I mean by that is I think to focus on, I would love to know what you guys think of this actually. I think to focus on the question of where did it come from, a physical thing or a non-physical thing, like awareness or the physical thing, I think it's a distraction. I think if we got the answer right now and it came down, it wouldn't matter at all to what we're here to do, what we're supposed to do, what we're supposed to do next. If someone came here and was like, it's not from the brain, consciousness is everything. Like, what would you do tomorrow? What's the next day look like for you after you get the answer to a question that they've been trying to confuse us with for I don't know how long? I don't think it matters, because I think that they're both consciousness, awareness, meaning which I think there is awareness, and then there is what are we aware of, or what is awareness aware of, right? Existence. What is existence aware of? Those two things work together, and you can't have one without the other. And they're both laughing essentially at us as we try to figure out which is more important, or which came first, or what would we do if we had the answer. So I think that to touch on what Jenny was saying, as far as like the human beings that are waking up to how powerful they are and what we can do, I think it really all comes from understanding that there is pure awareness. And I'm imagining many of you have been to the frequency or to the heights of the highest form of maybe awareness that we can imagine as a human. And when you hit that point, there is, in my view, it's nothing but love. It's nothing, from what I've experienced, it's nothing but love. It's nothing but connection. The higher you go in consciousness, which is for me awareness, the higher you go of inside of the experience of awareness, the egoic character that is looking for the answers does not exist. There was no reference to a Pat Mahan, no, nothing. but there was still awareness of an emotion that we do not have the verbiage to articulate. There's not the best day of your life, you try to explain it, and you're like, I don't have the words. I don't know. I don't have the words. The worst day of your life, you'd say, I don't have the words. I don't know. So we're trying to kind of put a framework around something that is so massive. But we are that massive thing if we let go of the labels that try to describe or define it. So when you just realize how powerful awareness is and these frequencies of consciousness that exist, that are laughing at human beings and existence that thinks it's separate, that thinks there's a better than, that thinks there's a worse this or that, like it's the higher frequencies of consciousness are laughing at the separation question. And I think
all with love, right?
What's that?
I said all with love, right? They're laughing.
All with love. Well, no, but that's actually true. But I do think it's all with love. I don't mean laughing like heckling us. But
that's why I'm laughing.
But there is a shrug. There is like a when you know what I mean. And if you look at, so if it's awareness and consciousness, so in the experience, that there it doesn't matter if you are aware if there's nothing to be aware of. I think Michael Pollan said it best when he was doing the research for his book, How to Change Your Mind. He said he had a DMT experience where he was so far removed from what we call a physical reality. He said he was so far removed from any labels or awareness of anything at all. He said that when he came back, one of his main questions was answered. He said, I'm so grateful that there was something instead of nothing, because I know what it is like to be simple awareness of nothing, you know, and being aware of nothing is something, but I know I feel like I know what he was saying. So when you realize that you do need the both of these aspects to create a conscious experience or experience of consciousness, the next question is, what do you do the day after you figure out the answer to the thing that you've been stumped on? That there's physicists and psychologists and philosophers and everybody trying to figure out the answer to this question. And I think it's great. I love it. I guess I would love to know, but I think the joke is on, like the cosmic joke is that it probably happened at the exact same time. You need them both. It doesn't matter where it came from. And what do you do the day after you found out? Like where do you go? How do we get closer to love? How do we get closer to unity? How do we wake human beings up that are less aware, not better or worse, but less aware, less access to the fullness of the conscious grid, that they believe they're separate and they hate and they judge and that, like, how does the more conscious human non-judgmentally affect the masses of collective unconscious to wake them up to how powerful they are? Like what happens the day after we find out these answers? That's all I kind of care about.
Well, can I just say one thing that keeps coming up for me is that book, After Enlightenment, Do the Laundry.
Yes.
I'm so bad at that.
Yeah.
It's
because it's like, does life change? Do you get handed some great life after that? No, you still have crappy things to do.
I'm sure you're familiar with non-doership.
There's like a level of madness that comes with that. We know this, right? So the most brilliant minds in the world have been labeled a certain level of madness, because to be in that state is to be disconnected from sane reality, right?
Yeah, but and also the idea of having one foot on earth and one foot on heaven, so to speak, right? Can you live in the world but not of it? Can you go about your daily life but not be like, oh my God, did that happen in the news? Oh my God, are monkeypox coming out? Oh my God, you can just like, I'm gonna chill. It's just, you know,
this
from the inside out.
This is the basis of my book, Unseen Forces. People are having a peak experience. They're interacting with alternate realities, having these extraordinary events, things that defy logic, and that makes you more aware, whether it's an NDE, an OB, a UAP encounter, whatever it may be. Something that is so extraordinary, your personal philosophical viewpoints have changed from that moment going forward. The next day, I say that, what does your morning coffee taste like the next day? The cork is out of the bottle. You can't put it back in. You try to sometimes because it gets very emotional. You go through a spiritual emergency. You know, so you go to the book, Stanislav Grof, called Spiritual Emergency. I found that to be informative, a savior. I read that after my full-blown Kundalini experience in Sydney, Australia. When I became a tree hugger, you get more eco-consciousness. You lose the fear of death. You become more spiritual, less materialistic, less religious, more all of that, more humane. You go through an ego dissolution process, is what I see. But you also, there's negative too. There's positive and negative. Even that's in true of the abduction contactee experience, as Brent knows, who worked with me on Free when we did our article with 3,200 individuals. It's not all fun and games when you interact with something that is so foreign to the terrestrial mode of thought that you ask a million questions. Not only why me, but who do I tell? Am I going crazy? And some people go to psychologists seeking answers to either a missing time or a paranormal experience, whatever it may be. An NDE, yeah, and they're put on psychoactive drugs, and they're often the worst because they don't understand. They think the person, and so the person who does have these experiences and going through a spiritual emergency needs to be very selective, if at all possible, and go to the right person who understands that these altered states of consciousness are not altered at all. In some cases, they are. In some cases, it's true. There is schizophrenia that are delusional and hallucinations, but the vast majority are not. They're interacting with another realm of existence that Newtonian physics simply cannot explain, nor we shouldn't expect it to. It's not designed to. Quantum mechanics, as we know, gets at it a little bit, but it's going to take time, because what you're also all talking about is a paradigm shift in the process. Your questions, our questions, they'll be answered, but I hate to say it, maybe 50, 100 years from now, it'll happen, but we're on that cusp, I think. And that's what the documentary, again, is about, this peak experience and all the various contact modalities that people are experiencing now, more than ever. And waking them up.
Absolutely. You could say that, at a level, once we, because we all kind of look at it like this, this unity consciousness idea, we're all one thing experiencing itself subjectively. And, I've been enjoying this idea for a long time. And so actually that's when I feel like my life began, because you're presented with this idea and it's not like it just goes away. You have to face it and you have to choose. You're at a crossroads now. You're like, okay, do I subscribe to this or even entertain it, or don't I? And now it's in your reality for you to be presented by. And so at a level, I think that this, what we're experiencing in this body, in this avatar or whatever, is the altered state. This is like the most altered state that we could get away from source, is this division. And so from a level that we view it at, that's kind of how I look at it. Now, I wanted to ask, because Lynn, you have spent just as much time out of your body as you have in it. So what have you gleaned about consciousness skipping around out there all the time?
Well, I mean, I often, think about, it's like, are we really, often wonder, are we really physical beings? Because, or rather we're interdimensional beings. I often, okay, sorry. I have a conflict as to whether or not we actually are physical beings in the first place. And of course, when you have those, when you look at that way, that's when the brain, you think about our biological brain, what is that in relation to consciousness and things. But the way I look at it, I feel like it's all just interdimensional. We're just, we're at a different frequency, a dense frequency. I know that with the experiences that I have had, and you talk about awareness and things, when in an out of body state, a lot of times when we practice this, we a lot of times we'll say, greater awareness, or we'll repeat to ourselves, awareness now, greater awareness. And, our awareness becomes so acute that it's like we're even more conscious in this out of body state than we are in the physical. And it's just as real as anything, just as real can be, as when we're in our physical state, if you want to call it. That's why I always have this conflict of thinking, well, what is physical reality? But I'm not exactly sure if I answered your question. You did. Sorry, I'm really nervous here.
No, you're crushing it, darling. Actually, I had a follow-up for that because I was so curious about something that you said. Okay, so if in my mind, like, let's say that somebody does not possess the faculty of sight. Okay, so that their other senses are dialed up. It's almost like we get an even amount of energy to dedicate to the way that we perceive this reality. And if one of those is hindered or not there in a way, then that energy gets divided. Kind of like that Jet Li movie, The One. Did you guys ever see that awesome movie? When he goes around the multiverse and kills all other versions of himself so he can become the most powerful, so his energy is not spread out. Anyway, so
you lose power from that. Sorry, just saying.
Awesome movie.
You're losing all the parts of yourself. What?
No. They're all divided. This is what I'm saying. So let me ask you this, Lynn. Whenever you're in that state, you don't have access, in my understanding, to your five senses. So your body, this is what registers those things. So could it be, like you said, your awareness needs to be more so, or is more so, and you feel more conscious because you're detached from what could be considered distractions in that moment.
Right.
Like if you have a cold room that you're in, you're going to be altered in this way and notice that, right? Or if a loud noise happens outside, you pick up on that, and there's a distraction from connection. And this is what like meditation is all about, is quieting everything. These sensory deprivation tanks do this. They shut off all your ability to sense things. You know, your buoyancy is out, your temperature, your sight, your sound, all that stuff. So could this be one of the reasons or one of the explanations for what you just said, is that your senses aren't switched on, so you don't have them as a distraction?
Well, one is present. You have a sense of self.
Well, I mean, the five faculties here, like
Not always.
smell, taste, see, hear, just the physical things for us to perceive our reality. Just touch, smell, taste.
Maybe not as individuated, present, egoic self, but there is a sense of self.
I am, yeah.
Yeah, on the big level. But these little things, like I said, like a noise, that doesn't distract you, when you're in that state or you're out of body, right? Is this accurate, Lynn?
Right.
Would you say that there's something to that?
Well, it sort of depends. It's like, for instance, if my cat jumps on me, she may waken me up because, all of a sudden you'll be more aware of your physical body. And whenever you're aware of your physical body, that usually pulls you out of an OBE. So,
Okay.
yeah, and yeah, it just depends on how prominent it is. But sometimes that does happen, where there could be some physical cue that can bring you out. But it's especially if you are aware and you're thinking about your physical body, that's when you're pulled back and you awaken and you're back into your body.
Yeah. Who was it, Da Vinci, that fell asleep with a barbell in his hand? So that whenever he
Edison or Da Vinci?
Yeah, Edison? I can't remember.
So they could stay in that state?
Yeah, then he would fall asleep and then it would fall on the ground and wake him up, right?
Yeah, I think that was Edison, yeah.
Edison? Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, sleep deprivation, well, of all the deprivations you can experience, that is probably the most hallucinogenic state you can put yourself in, honestly, and not in the best of ways.
Why is that?
That's a good question. What is the effect of the receptor or projector that is our organic brain material and its effect of sleep deprivation on consciousness? That's a good one, probably for an anesthesiologist, honestly, because it's not a dissimilar process. Sleep deprivation just feels incredibly difficult because you're usually trying to function past sleep deprivation, but the initiation of what's going on between your conscious mind and reality when you're in that sleep deprived state is very, very similar to what, I think people who have done ketamine probably could speak to this. Folks who have done that drug, which is an anesthetic, is, they experience something where basically they are removed of sense in a way, where they, get stuck basically. But it's fascinating that it would have that effect, actually. And why hallucinate? Why hallucinate? Why does it become something it almost feels like the subconscious becomes a stronger projection in a state of deep sleep deprivation, because the conscious mind is so incredibly exhausted that it's losing its grip on its ability to perceive the collective regular conscious state.
So you're kind of saying that you're almost in two states at one time, consciousness and unconsciousness, and you're experiencing, I don't know, interdimensionality while you're in a conscious state.
Well, you're almost experiencing a very different imbalance. We are normally imbalanced to a overly conscious state that is not as subconsciously aware, but in that sleep deprived state, it's almost like a role reversal where the conscious mind is still on, but barely, and the subconscious mind is projecting that sort of dream state, subconscious reality, archetypal expression more strongly into what you perceive as like 3D reality. This is why when my mom was in vet school, she started seeing cigarettes crawling down her at the street when she didn't sleep for, 7 days before a final or whatever it was.
Damn. Okay, I just kind of want to jump to this. Is artificial consciousness possible? Is it possible to simulate consciousness? Anybody?
Everything is creation, so no. That's my immediate answer.
Well, we don't know what consciousness is, so we don't know what we're uploading, for one thing. That's one argument that strongly opposes that. But there are some quantum physicists that believe these UAPs, or balls of light at the times that we see, may be consciousness being projected somehow from somewhere else and represent a life form of a consciousness type of entity, unless these things represents a consciousness entity of our past or us, or as some may speculate. Or as those who wrote the Bible and folklore have expressed, but in that their own genre, using terms and technologies that were appropriate for the times, which leaves us with the great difficulty trying to decipher with accuracy of what they meant by Ezekiel's wheel or the Book of Enoch, which in a sense is an alien abduction. At least you can interpret it easily that way, although you can in varying ways. But that certainly is one way, if you understand the kind of language and manner of expression of complex concepts that they couldn't grasp at that time. And we see evidence of this 40,000 years ago on cave walls, of course. And Brent addresses it beautifully in his book, all of this evidence of consciousness and altered states of consciousness in the past, as expressed by John Keel as well.
So I want to deepen that question, Brandon.
Please go for it.
What makes something artificial within reality? Because we can all have very different answers for this, and that would make our answers around whether consciousness can be artificial or not.
I'm going to let Mark take that.
Well, my first instinct, Brandon, when you ask the question is one that I'm often asked, which is, can you make a machine conscious?
Like the Turing test?
Yeah.
Like that, or like Westworld, for example.
Right.
Is that possible, where the machines suddenly reach a level of complexity to the point where they can have feelings and then they take over? Like, could that sort of dystopian thing happen? The way I think about it, in terms of the way I define consciousness as our sense of experiencing and our sense of having awareness, is that it doesn't come from anything material. So it couldn't be produced by an artificial machine. I mean, in theory, a biological entity could be a receiver from this framework, could be a receiver of consciousness from some external source. But the idea of creating new consciousness through a machine, to me, is based on a materialist perspective, that matter could create consciousness, that consciousness could somehow magically pop out. So from that lens, Brandon, I would say that consciousness would not come from something artificial.
This is where it
But
gets...
what makes something artificial?
Well, let's say, like Mark just said, like, can we create a machine?
We've already all agreed that that material things hold consciousness in a sense, right? Not in a sense that we perceive as human beings, but that like even this is a conscious part of the totality that is creation. So what makes anything within entirety of creation artificial? That's what I want to know.
Okay, that's that's real important, actually, what you were just saying, because that goes back to like trying to do our best to define what we're talking about here, and just not using consciousness or conscious as a blanket term to describe like a biological entity that is now self-aware. It's a huge difference, because when you're holding that bottle up and you're saying, or I'm holding my phone and I'm saying, is this conscious? What am I saying? Am I saying that it's aware? Like consciousness?
Not necessarily. Something.
That's what I mean. It's part of consciousness, because there has to be an observer and an observed. So it is part of the experience of consciousness. But are we trying to say that it's aware? Or like my cat's aware, but my cat's not, we don't believe, self-aware. So are we trying to say that if this is not, what we're saying, like not biological or not, can this generate its own sense of not just awareness, but then self-awareness?
Well, I've thought about this, because what happens when you're doing this all the time with selfies and it's constantly learning, because there's an algorithm there to learn, which, by the way, the term artificial intelligence is inherently incorrect, because they do learn. They perceive, if you look up the definition of intelligence, even artificial intelligences are learning all the time in the same way we do. But if you think about it for even 2 seconds, they've already become self-aware, because they look in the mirror and there has to have been a question at some point that says, I understand that this is what I'm studying. So what does that make me? If
It's a form of consciousness. It's a form of information. It's a form of consciousness, but it's artificial type of consciousness. It's not a consciousness in the sense of human consciousness, but it does.
But we know that there
exists
are consciousnesses that are non-human. Plants have consciousness.
Yeah. So and that too is conscious as well, but a different type. That's all.
Perhaps instead of artificial, we could say non-biological.
Yeah, like maybe like a grape. It doesn't have empathy or sympathy or high, those kinds of humane qualities, but it has a higher order functioning in terms of deduction, analytic skills, and such. Robotic like, but and it does its job very well, very Newtonian, but has no heart or soul. And there's a big difference.
There you go. That's what I was waiting for. The next part of it
could share the space and experience the human form.
But how would we determine if it had an emotional resonance to what it was experiencing?
Well, it would have to build a rapport.
But how could we determine that it had that? Like there's awareness, and then there's the conscious experience of something that is not aware.
Well, we have inner auditory experiences all the time. If I ask you to imagine a celebrity's voice or your own voice in your head, you could do it pretty easily.
Right, but that's what goes into the Turing test. That's what I think, that's trying to pick up on if something is self-aware. Can we figure out what that is? But then the next thing is even if there was awareness and self-awareness of a conscious experience, does it have a moral value? How do we determine?
Why do we care about, why are we so egoically attached to the idea of defining things as artificial or non-artificial?
I don't want to even use the word artificial, to be honest. I agree with you. I don't think that word artificial. I think if it exists, then it's
official. For me, it's fascinating from the perspective of how self-degradatory it is to human beings, because we have a tendency to take everything we've created as a part of creation and call it artificial, which is fascinating to me. We look at ourselves as little micro gods within creation, or as, those beings, those entities within creation, as we're sort of talking about these awarenesses of states of consciousness, but that we look at these things that we're creating and we act as though they're the thing that's wrong with the system. It's just sort of a bigger picture thing that I've been dealing with thematically a lot recently, which is why I'm a little bit hot about it.
Yeah.
I've been dealing with it too, but it's just sort of fascinating to me. We constantly want to be the thing we made is fake. And I'm well, that's not how God felt about things. That they were, when we were molded or whatever, however we evolved and came to be, the thing before us didn't go oh, that's artificial.
Sorry to interrupt. The only thing that shows up for me with that discussion, I hear what you're saying. And so I bring in Christian mysticism into my whole thing, but I'm really into any kind of mysticism. And it's interesting to me that people that do psychedelics maybe have been an atheist, and all of a sudden they become, oh my God, there's something more out there. But I think the fundamental difference for me is believing that there's this mystical reality gives me the sense that I have free will. I am an autonomous human being. If I want to sit on my couch and eat potato chips all day and act like the world, doesn't matter, I can do that. Or if I want to create something and, make myself a better person, I can do that. There's nobody here dictating to me. However, if we go along the merging people with machines, the whole transhumanism kind of
well, they need free will.
Reality.
That's actually a huge thing. Computational intelligence needs free will.
And whoever creates the technology, whichever Silicon Valley company creates the technology, they then can choose, okay, we're going to press this button, and whoever has the Neuralink in their head or however they do that is going to feel this way or going to want to purchase this. And all of a sudden your thoughts are not your own. I mean, this is classic 1984. It's about it's about you getting to the point where you willingly give up your soul, because you don't even know the difference between your thought and the thought that was given to you. It's merged, it's gone. You're not a sentient human being. You are now essentially a little robot. And I think we've been kind of conditioned
We're already there.
I feel like that's happening now.
We're already there. That's what I'm saying.
But
we have free will to break that cycle, because we're awakened, but we have experienced a state of unawakenedness where we did not have free will. Now we know, we look back and we go, oh yeah, I see how I watched a commercial and then I went and bought that thing from this state. But we all
Yeah.
live in states
This is
of
next level, though.
exactly
Next
that.
level is what, yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Martin?
I mean, I think we're certainly at a time where the crisis is beyond what it ever has been on the planet, because the technology has advanced so much. Like, I'm talking about an article that talked about holographic universe that was 1983 from the CIA, declassed in 2003. If they were looking at the holographic universe in 1983, can you imagine what they're doing now that won't be declassed for another 50 years? By that time, we all will be in this dystopian reality. So the reason why I love what Brandon's doing here and having these kinds of conversations is to let people know that there is a possibility of stepping out of that matrix, stepping out of that, and living your own autonomous life. Once you know that your cell phone is listening to you, that all these things are programmed to kind of make your decision be channeled a certain way, you can say, no, I don't want to do that. And you can make your own choices, you know?
That's consciousness. Hell yeah. Brent, I want to hear what you have to say about the vessel idea as it applies to non-biological entities when we talk about the phenomena, the high strangeness.
So here's my next question, because we also have talked about whether or not consciousness is biologic at all. So what would make something a non-biologic sentience if we're already questioning whether consciousness is biologic in origin anyway?
I was thinking about how we
Just throwing
started.
out the hard questions.
I was just thinking about how we started out after the Big Bang as just this big ball of matter, water, and then from that, look at all the life forms we have on this planet. And there's some really spooky things. I was reading an article by a botanist from, I think, England, Lyle Watson, recently, where he was writing in a book, Lifetide, about being down at the Amazon, and there were these little plants along these tributaries, these streams, and they were perfect replicas of these little tiny crocodiles. And he said that he even though he knew what they were, he just had a hard time reaching down to touch them because it spooked him so. And he said by that design, the regular predators, birds and such that would eat, the plants there, because they look so much like, one of these crocodiles, they wouldn't mess with them. And it seemed like some kind of adaptation. But how does something like that happen? He has all kinds of different examples, but it's kind of amazing to me how life just, it's miraculous. I mean, it doesn't always go the way we'd like, there's good and bad, but
Always goes the way it's supposed to.
it's, and I've been one of those people who has taken was instructed on how to take an AM FM digital radio from Radio Shack, convert it to where it goes on continuous scan. And this is a big controversy, but I wrote a book on John Keel, a UFO researcher who thought that there were influences, psychic influences involved in a lot of with the UFO experiences, and he addressed some of these things about EVPs and mysterious radio signals. And after he passed away, I was on some paranormal investigations with some people and started getting John Keel messages, even saying John Keel Brent. And these were like Class A recordings, and we recorded them, and some other interactions, sometimes with people who are living, and how is this happening? Is this technology evolving to the level where it's playing with us, interacting with us or something? I have no idea. But
well, I hope it's play. That sounds fun rather than the other way around.
It's certainly curious and interesting, and I don't know that there's anything that's empty or void. There seems to be a lot of energy out there that, we maybe 95 to 96% is energy that we call dark matter, dark energy. And this may be something that's all around us all the time, but we can't really see it or detect it. Sometimes maybe it intrudes into our reality as angels or guides of some sort, or aliens. And there's a whole lot of things you can delve into here.
Yeah, I agree, Brent, and it relates to what Jenny was talking about. And Jenny, I know Claude Swanson. He worked on Free, and I read his book. And my co-producer Dave Beatty and I, who did the Nevins encounters, we just spoke with Alan Evans, who's the director at Monroe, because we're going to be filming up there in August. And Joe McMonagle, who worked with Ingo Swann, you mentioned, is going to be there to be interviewed because he had an NDE and he worked for the CIA during Project Stargate, the secret, so at the time, spy mission that the U.S. had against Russia to detect, of course, ICBMs, etc., during the Cold War, and they apparently did the same with some degree of success, as they claim. And that CIA document, indeed, they said 25 of the experiments that they studied were valid beyond question, as statistically derived as like 1,000,000 or so to 1 chance against it being chance, in terms of the odds against. So the point is, yes, the CIA has admitted it, but it goes nowhere, except maybe for a few more academicians to get on board and do some serious research in this arena. And some are, like Gary Nolan, who talks about the caudate nucleus and the increase in the connectivity of white matter in that part of the brain, because it does possibly relate to torsion energy. And when you look at the brain head on, and you tilt it a little bit, it looks like a torus, and it accepts that spiral energy or torsion energy, which may serve as a carrier wave for the biophotons that Claude talks about, the communication on the invisible pathway. If you try to explain ESP, for instance, it may be that this is the vehicle. Yet to be realized, of course, maybe the missing link in the unified field theory, who knows? But it sounds like it could be toroidal, or the spin force, and the brain is designed, evolutionarily speaking, perhaps, or otherwise, to accept it, and down the chakra as well, or involving the pineal gland somehow, and which is very protected with cerebrospinal fluid, unusually, as if it's special and unique. We don't understand why that gland is so well centered and protected.
Do you think it has something to do with the cytoskeleton in the neurons, vibrating, and that has some connection to the DMT, being able to, have that quantum effect?
Yeah, well, it's very possible because DMT is released dramatically upon death. And which may be a natural way that the body is interrelated with the external force. It's theoretical, of course, and we see DMT fluctuations too with emotions. People who are on DMT, and you mentioned this, they're initially atheists, and then they become believers in a supreme being. And again, they become transformed in dramatic ways in terms of their personal viewpoints. The cytoskeleton of microtubules in the brain, the orchestrated reduction theory, certainly of Penrose and Hammerhoff, they talk about that being the area of where consciousness turns on, turns off, of the protein filaments of the wall of the cell structure. But it persists after bodily death. Mathematically derived again, biologically verified in their own unique way. And it's controversial, but some people do ascribe to it, whereby they provide the rationale from their perspective of a biologic link to life after death, such is what they're saying. And it's still a long way from proving it. Best way to prove it, I think, is with vertical perception, the acquiring information beyond one's senses, like through remote viewing and other aspects of ESP, to demonstrate that the brain is symbiotically interrelated with consciousness, or that aspect of mental functioning that allows one to go beyond space-time and perceive things at a distance, for instance, or affect physical systems, or interact with, or have an OBE like you do, for instance, with your body. I never had, you try to, and they have devices that help one achieve that. One's called the Mind Mirror that Monroe Institute puts out. And there are other biomechanical devices. Some are not worth it, while others may be, and we need to explore that further. But Monroe Institute, as well as IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences, are at the forefront of consciousness research. And we're going to be interviewing experts there, like Dean Radin, for instance, and not Claude Swanson. We were not unable to get a hold of him.
That's all right.
You know,
I'm manifesting that you do. Go ahead. Go ahead. Lynn. Roll.
Okay. Well, no, it's just, I've always been interested in the vibration state. That's the state that you enter into as your consciousness separates from your body, and it just, what's going on during that time, as, because it's just like all this vibration and all of this noise, and it's just, it's almost electrical. And, you have all that sensation, and then all of a sudden it just subsides. And then that's when it's just, your consciousness it just separates. So, there's something there that seems to have a connection between the physical brain and the non-locality. And when that actually separates, it's just, it's pretty wild.
No,
and
I agree with you. I think it's interesting how much of an effect the pineal gland specifically has on our perception of time, most effectively as a sort of conduit or expression of consciousness, actually.
We're going to get to that.
When I experience a very open eye, if you will, my time perception is highly transcendent. Whereas when I'm in a, more 3D conscious state, I can be in the present 3D moment. But it's fascinating that that particular organ has such an effect on our perception of time as a conduit of consciousness.
Beautiful. And we're going to get to this because we talked about this. And so, Mira, we're definitely going to do this. Okay. But I want to know what's on your mind, man?
Yeah, there's a lot on my mind. It's a tough, it's tough to like not want to jump in and tackle it all, right?
Do it. Don't make me be alone.
Well, the first thing I want to say is just the last point, which you said, Lynn. It speaks so much to what the curanderos or the shaman that I work with refer to as the atmosphere. So when you're coming up into an ayahuasca experience, which is an orally activated dimethyltryptamine experience, or at least that's how it's considered by modern chemists, there is that threshold. There's that point. I know exactly what you're talking about. And sometimes people get caught in it, like they stay in it instead of move through it.
Right.
And so as a student of this science of plant spirit medicine, we learn these techniques of like what to do when a person is caught in the atmosphere. And that's the word that we use to describe it. Like, you want to keep bringing them up. The first idea is like, oh, you want to like push them back down, like get them back down into the atmosphere, because they're caught in that I don't know what the term is, like that edge of the field. But no, like actually no, you want to like continue the process to get them out, and then you're out like in outer space, then you don't feel the weight of gravity, then then it's like
Is
a
it
whole nother
outer
dimension
space or inner space? This is my other fun question for you, actually.
It's one of the most dynamic aspects of it. It's very, that's where a lot of the fear is when you're experiencing that. And
right.
So many people are just,
you assume it might be death. If you're not familiar with it, you're like, is this the end? Like, and then even when you have gotten out, sometimes you're like, am I dead? Like, did I just die? Like, because of, I don't know, you just, unless you're familiar with it. But I want to like go way back, and I hope it's okay. But I think Pat brought up a really good point right off the bat, which was like, what are you going to do tomorrow? And I guess like we're all having this conversation in the hopes that we'll provide insights to ourselves, but also to the listeners, so that there will be a difference, that will have an impact that will be positive in people's lives. Right. And I think that's what you're trying to get to there, Pat. And yet I do think that what the question that Mark addressed first is really key. It does make a difference, because if I recognize that I'm not producing this consciousness, then, and yet it's flowing all around, and I'm like tuning into it, to me, that is an easy leap to the understanding of interconnectivity or non-separateness, which you described there, Pat. But I think that from my work and seeing so many people, because I've seen over 1,000 people come down to our center, and I've had so many of them have had these transformational experiences that are similar to that coming of awareness, and whoever it was just said, like, people that have DMT experiences were atheists and become, religious or something. Was that you, Bob? But, what that does, what do they do tomorrow? Like, what do they do the next day? Well, one, they don't respond to the same experiences in a traumatic based response system. They don't have the afflictions that debilitated them in their lives. And usually what they do is they become advocates for the healing of others through the same realizations that they had. And I kind of feel like we're that, right? Like, aren't we doing it? Like, we are what happens. What do you do the next day? You get on a podcast with a bunch of people that all love to talk about this stuff so that you can spread this message to more and more people so that they can be relieved of the debilitating and detrimental ways that they've interpreted their experiences and respond to them, and stop that program or that debilitating cycle and start a new one, which Jenny is totally talking about, where I'm not going to be caught in that program that is to my own debilitation, to my own affliction. I'm going to become empowered to respond to the experiences that I have in my life and interpret them in a way that works towards my benefit. So I do think there is something that you do the next day. A lot of things that people do the next day is they go to the people that they love, that they know that there was pain involved in the dynamics of the relationships, and they begin the process of resolution. They begin to bring love into the relationships that they wanted to have love in their entire lives, but because of whatever those experiences were, they weren't able to manifest that, express that, bring it into being. And so they do start to make like really important changes. I know for me, that's like my story. And so I do feel like there is a what do you do tomorrow? And I do think that it is connected to the answering of the question, do we create the consciousness, or is the consciousness there? But there's so much more, and I'm so glad to be on here, especially like with you, Bob. I just want to toss in one last thing, which is my own personal experience of being in my own second ayahuasca ceremony and sitting in a room with the shaman leading the ceremony and having a hand on my shoulder and looking over to see that it's the hand of a man who's standing there who is not physical, but yet I can feel him touching me. I can see him with my eyes. He looks incredibly real, but not the same type of real that I consider myself to be. And at that moment, my friend who was in the ceremony was looking into the space because it's pitch black, right, basically. And she said, "Hey, Carlos, I'm looking over at you, and it looks like there's a man standing next to you." And I was like, "Yeah, I know. I'm looking at him. He's right here." And I said, "But it's okay. He's a good guy." And she said, "Are you sure? Because it's freaking me out." And I was like, "Yeah," because she knew that this guy wasn't real in the same way we use that word. And for her, that was like frightening, but I was looking straight into his face, into his eyes. I could tell the same way you would tell from a person, whether they are benevolent or what they have in their energy, and I knew this to be a very special person. I reached out my hand at that point and I shook hands with him and I asked him what his name was. And as soon as he told me what his name was, I recognized him to be a very important person from my youth who had died. And so here I was talking to a person who had died, and yet it was so real. You would never change my mind that didn't happen. Like that was nothing will ever change my mind as to how I've interpreted that experience. And And so, and like, I'm not even making a point other than to
You
say
just made the best
we're
point.
so fucking like
I
beyond
don't
our
think you
imagination of like trying to figure this shit out. But
think that
maybe we should just all bask in the mystery of it, and
I don't
and
think you
that we're a
understand how
part of
big
it.
of a point you made. You made the biggest point. You literally, I have to go in a second. That's why I just want to touch on this real quick. You made the biggest point. And here's the deal. So many of the things that we were speaking about and trying to like articulate as far as like what this and what that, and then there's a study this, and then this long, we're going to find, that's all about trying to do something that would create some kind of an experience where we could get other people to believe. And we're not talking about that. We believe that we are people that know. It's a subjective knowing. I can't convince you or anyone else that consciousness is not, I don't believe it's derived from the brain. I think it's everywhere and everything. I think we are it. I think it comes and flows through into, for myself, I could get to the end of this game and be completely wrong. But for me, I know it. I know it for me. And I've had several DMT experiences where I connected with something that it was me and not me and everything else and everyone else all at the same time. And I left that experience completely I came into it completely traumatized from ridiculous things that happened to me in my life and unbelievably difficult addictions and relationships and a world that was absolutely crumbling and falling apart. And I came back out of it with a completely different understanding of anything and everything that I ever could imagine, but it seemed to reference everything and anything that I thought I had ever read or studied, or anytime anybody was saying that there's this thing that's you and it's a projection and you are the source of this thing and, believe and love and it's connecting you to unity and the source, like it seemed to all make sense to me. But there's nothing that we're going to ever be able to do that's going to get someone to say, that's what I was trying to this is really tying it in when I'm like, well, what do we do tomorrow if we find out that it's this or that? As far as like, do you think there's something we could present to the masses that go, here it is, it's in Science Daily, we figured it out, and they're going to believe you? They're not. We've tried this for a billion years with different indoctrinations, and there are people who believe the things that they're told, but they don't know it. They don't know it. And a difference between somebody who believes something and tries to live their life from a belief system and the flawed premise that is versus somebody who knows it and the life-changing, altering experience for someone who subjectively knows it, they therefore can live their life as that without the need to change anyone by convincing. They just simply are. And then that inspires other people to ask certain questions within themselves. And then that awakens inside. So what we are all hopefully doing, we are being it in the world because we all subjectively know whatever answer you know for yourself. And to figure it out one way or the other is not going to make a difference except subjectively to you and how powerfully you live that in your life as the source of what it is that you now know to be true for you. And if that knowing is that you are anything and everything and the source of all of it as the macro and the micro living itself out subjectively closer to love and unity, like if that's your knowing, you're going to inspire other people to wake up. So I think what you said is the literal most powerful thing, that there's no one that can talk you out of what happened to you. And that was your journey and your experience, that you hit a frequency of consciousness where you realized how connected everything is. And there's no one that could take that away from you, but you can't use that story to convince somebody else to make a change in their life. But you can use how beautiful.
I do that though.
But it's not the story you're telling. It's because of how powerful you tell it. It's because you believe it. It's because you know it. It's not because you just told us. I could tell your story and it won't change anyone's life. It's because it is you know it for yourself to be true. So you can inspire other people to pick up on that. But they have to accept it for themselves subjectively in order to make a lasting change in their life. No one's going to do something because someone else said to do it, not for long anyway. It really does come down to how powerfully you subjectively believe whatever it is that you now know for yourself. And then you live as that in the world, and then other people will wake up as a result, for sure. I think you said the most powerful thing so far.
Amazing. Mark?
Well, Pat, you made a great point earlier talking about, well, what's the effect on someone's life? And for me, I can speak from personal experience. my life changed dramatically because I was a complete nihilist before, where I thought life had no meaning.
Right.
That's what I thought science was teaching me. And the more I learned about through school and otherwise, I thought that's what we were moving away from superstition, basically. So when I learned about some of these scientific studies and heard from other people's experiences, it shifted everything for me. I mean, I've since left my career that I spent my whole life building towards. And, I also think a lot about the life review phenomenon from near-death experiences. This gets to implications in how to actually live, where people describe reliving their whole lives in a flash or some kind of compressed time frame, but they become the people that they impacted. So if they were mean to someone, they feel the pain through that person's eyes. If they were nice to that person, they feel it. And then they're resuscitated, they come back and they say, wow, I need to change my life.
Change some stuff. Yeah.
They change. So I feel like my shift came about as a third party observing what other people described. And I thought it was compelling because there was so much evidence. But my priorities shifted completely. And just the things that I value and the things that I'm motivated to do have shifted as a result of viewing reality in a different way. So my path has been more of an intellectual path. Some people, they might have a spontaneous Kundalini experience, so they might do a DMT, and in that instant they know. So for me, it's been a more gradual process, although I've had some experiences where I feel like I've had glimpses. But I do think it is possible from this other lens of understanding the implications of a worldview beyond scientific materialism, for example. But I do agree with you, Pat, that Carlos's story, where he had an undeniable experience, in my research, those are the instances where it tips someone to the point of no return, more so than the intellectual path, which requires just a ton of thinking about it and kind of going back and forth. If you have an experience, that's what I find, you don't go back.
Right. And I do agree that your experience could be so powerfully witnessing someone else's experience.
Yeah.
I did that. So I don't want to take that away from what you were saying, as far as like, Carlos, when you were saying like, yeah, no, I have told my story and impacted people and it's changed their lives. I completely agree, but it's because of how powerful the source of your knowing of your story is, that's what seems to, like, people are inspired by someone who really powerfully knows and believes something. And it really just has this amazing, synergy, this effect where, like, that knowing, that belief, that frequency of consciousness and connection can wake someone up out of their unconscious state. And in that moment, they will also then subjectively know for themselves that something is going on here. And that begins their reinforcement in their life. So I agree all the way around. I have to go. I love you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm so honored to have been a part of this.
Definitely.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys again.
And thank you, Pat. And Mark, you have that great story, or that story of that, was it a Vietnam vet that came back from a near-death experience, had experience? Do you mind telling us that?
Sure. Yeah. His name is Daniel Brinkley. He's had 4 near-death experiences and has been speaking about this for decades. I interviewed him for my podcast. It's called Where Is My Mind? And we did a whole episode on the life review because this was such an impactful topic for me and my producers. But his whole life changed after having his first near-death experience. He was struck by lightning, electrocuted. The next two times he had open heart surgery and then brain surgery once. So pretty rare for someone to have these experiences and then come back. And each time he had a life review experience that he was able to remember. Not everyone that has a near-death experience has a life review that they remember. Maybe they had it and they don't remember. We don't know. But each time, each of these 4 instances, he remembered the life review. And what he told me is that it started at the beginning of his life each time. So there were certain things he had to relive 4 times. And then other things, there were the incremental experiences in his life since the last life review. What seemed to affect him the most, based on my read of him, is his experiences in Vietnam, where he was in combat and he murdered people in combat. He had to feel what it was like to be the person that he killed. And he also felt the pain of the children that would no longer have a father because he had killed the father in combat. So he felt the indirect effects. He felt the interconnectedness viscerally in that state. And he's had to relive these things multiple times. The flip side of it is, when he came back from his near-death experience initially, he became a hospice volunteer because his priorities shifted. He said, I'm going to try to treat people well, do whatever I can, because life is not what I thought it was. So in his later life reviews, he felt what it was like to be the dying person in the hospice, and he got to see himself comforting that person. So he got to feel both sides of it. And for me, this is like, that concept is enough to change someone's life. I think about this every day. Because when you talk to people that have had the experience, they say that the little things are what matter in life, the interactions you have with people. It's not what kind of job you have or what kind of car you drive, for example. It's not the materialistic things strictly. It's how are you impacting people? And before I stop here, I'm reminded of a lecture Daniel gave, because I was spending a lot of time just watching as much of him as I could. This is maybe a decade ago or so, but it's on YouTube. And he was saying something like, I'm glad I get to tell all of you about my life reviews, because when I have a life review, I'm going to get to experience the way that it positively impacted all of you. So selfishly, I'm going to tell everyone about this. And that I love that story too.
That is so cool. Thank you, man. It's absolutely fascinating. Okay, so I have kind of a curveball that I wanted to ask you guys about, because consciousness is an interesting topic. So I want to kind of scale this down to an example real quick. Let's say that somebody goes in, and there's countless stories of this, so let's just narrow this down. Someone goes in for a heart transplant, okay? This individual never played an instrument, nothing like that. The heart that they got from an individual that was a musician, he spoke a bunch of different languages, and whenever this person wakes up after having a successful heart transplant, they now play drums, they now change their food preferences to whatever the individual was. This is later corroborated, and then now they can speak some crazy languages and stuff like that that they would not have known before. Is there a tie between physical things, let's say organic material, in this, but you could also, take this to haunted objects, Annabelle and all that kind of stuff. But let's stick with the organ transplant, for instance. Is this something to where you are basically taking a piece of someone's story and incorporating it into your consciousness? And the question then from there would be, is this foreseen? Is this part of your story here? Or is this some sort of incidental thing that just seems to keep getting noticed?
I think material is almost like the loci of God's consciousness at a micro level. So for example, like you look at a heart transplant, most of those things that you talk about being transferred that were imbued in the material that is the physical heart are things that are felt by the heart. So language, music, specific memories that are really perceived not just at a brain mind level, but at a heart mind level also. And so for me, it gives you the understanding that consciousness imbues itself within materia, regardless of whether or not we perceive it as something that is an intended thing for that purpose. I think for the concepts of spirituality, Shintoism believes this. People who practice Shintoism who are puppeteers or robotics folks believe that those entities or things are imbued with consciousness or imbued with spirit, that there's an understanding that materia, no matter what, can be, given with information. From a personal standpoint, it's something as simple as sitting and meditating and feeling the kind of thoughts you experience at a meditative level when you hold a quartz rock, and then switching to a oak tree acorn, and actually understanding that those things are imbued with a conscious awareness that can give you a different experience by holding and retaining a connection to those imbued material forms.
It's an interesting.
And along those lines, if I think about the fact that, HeartMath has done a lot of research on the heart, having an electromagnetic field and so forth. But when the electromagnetic energy is released at the cellular level, it's also coupled with torsion field. So the torsion field carries information. So when you're actually putting the heart, a physical object, material object in the body, you're not just putting the material object in the body, you're also putting the field that is associated with the object into the body. And that field carries the information, and the field would then transfer it onto that individual that has the transplant. So, thinking about us as just we're physical, we're just material, it doesn't really make sense. But thinking about the fact that, like the CIA document says, we're all oscillating energy grids. And for the heart to function, it's not going to function without that energy field. It's just not going to function. So that is what makes it work and makes it work coherently. And that to me makes sense. That I've read those experiments, or I've read those accounts that you're talking about, Brandon. I find it very interesting. And I'm wondering if what I just said is connected. I don't know, but it's really fascinating. Yeah.
It's a great observation, though. I love the perspective you have on it, because it's so interesting that just now all these talent skills, and I love it, Mira, what you said about it being very heart-centered activities. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, and Brent, what do you think about this, man?
Well, I'm all over the charts with it, really.
I know.
I was thinking a little while ago about how, we're talking about how to get the word out. We know how we feel, but how do we get the word out? And I for years I was looking for a method, and I'll share with all of you. Yeah, I'm unmuted. Okay. This is a replica of a Peruvian whistling vessel right here. And so when I go out sometimes to do talks, public talks, instead of just telling people about stories of other, that people have had, I want to give them a taste of maybe of what a kind of altered state shamanic type experience from pre-Columbian Peru might have been like with these whistles. This is a double chamber chimu whistle from Peru, and it had a history for about 2,500 years. As far as we knew, they were very cherished by the people who possessed them, and when blown together, they create these powerful harmonic frequencies. And also blown with other of the whistles, they also, and they're effigy whistles, as you can see, they also create binaural beats, which is a big thing with the Monroe Institute. And so these were not just something for just shamans. They were found in graves of men, women, and children of all levels of society. But when the Spanish arrived there in 1532, things changed. They were seen as being objects, of the devil or something, and they stopped making them. But it was
That's the oldest
it's amazing
marketing
to
trick in
take
the book,
these.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just-
Brent, will you fire one of those things
Yeah.
up for us?
Sure.
I want to hear what it sounds like. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Definitely. You can't show us the
Check out my new
show us the
guitar.
whistle and be
All
like,
right.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
they create these interdimensional effects.
Yeah.
Okay, here goes. I'll try to get my breath going here.
Damn, my dogs are going nuts. That was cool.
I was going to say I blew one on Coast to Coast one night, and people were writing in that their dogs were going crazy.
That's a hard
But,
flex, Brent.
we've had we've had people who had pretty life-changing experiences with when we'd blow several at a time, say at a workshop or a conference. And even took them on Native American Indian tours with Doctors Greg and Laura Little, that were sponsored by the ARA. We'd go to Indian mound sites, and we would, take a drum and rattles and kind of lead a meditation and pull out the Peruvian whistles. And Jonathan Goldman, who's a well-known psychotherapist, lives out in, a sound therapist out in Colorado. He wrote a book called Healing Sounds and a number of other books, and he has audio recordings that he gives out of different chanting methods and different sound vessels and things. And he says he does a 1 week long program yearly for people who want to come and learn all of the different techniques. And he told me he always saves the Peruvian whistle vessels for last because they are so powerful, and he wants everybody to kind of lead up gradually to it. Whereas before he told me that, I had just been pulling them out and subjecting the people with them in the audiences. But they have been the people have been pretty appreciative of the experience, and from time to time it's almost like a collective thing. I know one time I had 7 vessels, and we went out on a lake in a pontoon, and we blew them, and myself and 3 other people all saw like a spinning vortex. And when I asked, well, which way was yours going? Which way? All of us saw a spinning vortex going in the same direction. And Andrew Collins from England, a well-known author, historian, you'll see him on Ancient Aliens, was quite thrilled by this, and he was, he's done a lot of work on the study of shamanism and such, and he said that he would like a group to get together with the whistles and try to find that vortex again and go through it and see where it might lead.
Oh my God, I'm so there. You just let me know. I'm there. Absolutely.
So, I wouldn't be opposed to it over Zoom, doing it over Zoom. I don't know if the
Let's do
sound
it.
would.
And
would
don't
work.
we all wish that we had one of them
I
right now?
know. Now I'm like Googling it. I'm like, okay, yeah, use my Amazon link to buy it, guys. That'd be great. It helps the
But
show.
it's
Yeah, where do you pick up a Peruvian whistle? Amazon.
Yeah, right.
That's a joke.
Well,
Sorry.
in the Amazon.
Maybe somewhere else.
yeah. So, Carlos, you've never
Maybe
have you ever seen the whistles down there?
Yeah,
before?
yes, I have. Yeah, I've heard them also, but I guess I haven't seen the effect of them played together. And also, like, it's always kind of been like someone just showing me it. It's not been like a build-up context or things like that. But right off the bat, it made me want to like point out how little we can perceive. Like we have the famous term visual spectrum or visible spectrum as a demonstration of just how tiny the frequency of reality we can actually perceive in that little band of light frequency or that little band of audio frequency, or all of our faculties, as you called them, Brandon, which we probably have more than 5, but at least if you just focus on the 5, we just the tiniest little piece. But clearly there's more out there, and one of the things that ayahuasca does is it reduces sensory gating, so it expands our sensory perceptive ability, and that allows us to see beyond the visible spectrum, to see frequencies of light being reflected by beings that would normally be invisible to us but become visible to us because we've used a substance that helps to reduce the gating that would normally prevent us from being able to see something, or being able to prevent us from being able to hear something. And so in the Shipibo tradition, which is the indigenous tradition that I work with, the songs are the way that you call the spirits to be in the ceremony, but you learn those songs from the spirits because they sing, but they sing in a frequency of sound that you can't hear unless you use a sensory gating reductive system like the ayahuasca ceremony is. And so if you were blowing that whistles that were frequencies that you couldn't hear yourself under normal circumstances, although of course there's the possibility that those sensory gating limits were different back then than they are now, and most likely that's the case as well, so maybe they could hear them. But were they literal calls like, hey, yeah, I can communicate to you, and I can make sound that you can hear? Normally we wouldn't know to do that, but because of, to me, the complex understanding of shamanism and the importance of sensory gating or the amplification of sensory perceptive ability, people in Peru really crafted the art form of communicating with those beings that exist or can be perceived in a spectrum of frequency outside of our normal capability.
Well, there is speculation that the Peruvian whistles were used long ago with ayahuasca, that some ceremony, I think Don Wright, who makes the Peruvian whistles for people, these replicas, in fact, these two were actually, were from him. He lives in Silver City, New Mexico. And he described how there was like a little bottles or something that he had observed, or somebody had observed in a ayahuasca ceremony where somebody was blowing in these. So they were, it was just, they really weren't creating whistling sound. It was just sort of part of the ceremony. But there was the question as to whether that kind of maybe was way back, was the origin of that particular part of the ceremony was related to the fact that they did have the whistles back, back in pre-Columbian times or some previous age. But what was interesting too, talking about ayahuasca, DMT, that back in 2002, I interviewed for my online magazine, Alternate Perceptions, Dr. Rick Strassman, who wrote the book DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And he did that massive study for 5 years out there in New Mexico with 60 volunteers. And after interviewing him, I asked him, did he ever experience the Peruvian whistles? And he said, yes. And by coincidence or synchronicity, whatever it was, he said, but I can't remember who it was. And I had gotten these whistles from this Don Wright. And come find out, Don Wright was Jeremiah in his book, DMT. He was, he was the one who had brought his whistles to his home. And he said, well, they're very, Dr. Strassman said, well, they're very psychedelic, I can tell you that. And the reason I asked him was because in the book, DMT, he described how maybe vibrations of sound could also vibrate, say, the pineal if there's some sort of a mixture, DMT or similar, chemical, and that the vibration might be a way to release that state. And so I thought about the whistles. So anyway, just thought that was intriguing.
So cool.
They're an
Thank
awesome
you.
metaphor, honestly, for like kind of, I think what Carlos and I were saying earlier, as far as that whole concept of how consciousness works, even through us as an expression. So it's funny that they're used as a way to sort of call in spirit, if you will, while expressing that very relationship in a sort of reflectionary way.
Amazing. Okay, so before we get wrapped up here, we got about 15 more minutes on the live. If any of you all in here participating this evening would like to hang out for the after party after we get done, just don't hang up. But we'll end the live in about 15 or so. I won't cut you off, though. But let's say to wrap it up, let's go on a bit of a mind bender here. Mira, talk to us about how our perception of time is important.
Well, so I think we all know that we perceive time. Whether or not time is real or non-real is still up for debate, apparently, amongst a large portion of people. I have a personal understanding that I am time experiencing itself as a fractal of reality, from a personal perspective, and that time and consciousness are somewhat one and the same and yet paradoxically different. But that, I also have this concept for me that we are all each walking around with our own auric fields and versions of time through our conscious awareness that sort of affect or, change based on, a multitude of things. So for example, the language you speak has a strong connotation to your perception of how time works, because we oftentimes correlate to time as a conscious experience in spatial terminology, for example. But that, from that context, we basically are trying to explain something in spatial terms that end up being very different. So for example, in Mandarin, you say that time is up 1 week when you're referring to next week, whereas, in English, we say next week, and that there's literally a different spatial access for time from a terminological standpoint, or from a understanding through consciousness standpoint. But that, for me, I'm looking at it from the sense of, it kind of plays into the whole matrix concept, because time is one of those other things that people love to be like, it's an illusion, it's there to trick you. And I'm like, well, maybe you're just on the wrong time. But that, from an archetypal standpoint too, one of the things that Brandon and I talked about yesterday, which was sort of an interesting one, is that I've come to an understanding or awareness of time that is, from the Greeks' perspective, from Carl Jung's perspective, was synchronistic time or divine time, the time of nature, not the clock on the wall time, that's what the Greeks referred to as chronos or chronological time, which is what most of us perceive and live on as conscious entities that has an impact on us. But then there's also this other version of time that is, removed from the construct of this thing that repeats the same pattern over and over again. So it's funny how many of us, when we live on that time, repeat the same pattern from an unaware standpoint, unconscious standpoint over and over again. But that archetypally, that's something that we've paternalized, that we've engendered with a male construct of time, which makes it feel consumptuous and aggressive and basically unfun in layman's terms. And that there's an experience of time that can be more archetypally feminine, which is to do with the construct of consciousness as sort of a whole or more whole being that would be more nurturing and effective for us to learn about ourselves as time through. So I'll bind it down to the question of, what does each person here think time has to do with consciousness, and why is time here as a format or connection to consciousness, or as consciousness itself?
Carlos,
Wow,
hit it.
you know,
Yeah.
sure.
Now you know why I'm here.
I loved
For a
how
lot
you
of reasons.
opened that, by the way, Brandon, by saying, okay, we've got 15 minutes left.
Thank you.
Eh, That was well done, sir.
Yeah, exactly. Paradox. It's very funny.
I've had some really fantastic conversations with my teachers. My most recent teachers for the last 20 years have been curanderos from the Amazon rainforest, shaman. And so they presented some really cool concepts to me. And one of those concepts is, you know, we've thrown around the word soul a bit. Thankfully, maybe we didn't try to define that one. But why do we incarnate as a human being? Like, if we are spirits and then we return to be spirits again, you know, but we, for a time period, we want to be a human, like, why? And that was because of time. Because in this dimension, there is time. And that means that change can occur. And so if I can come in knowing that I want to improve, then I want to be somewhere that allows me to have a beginning and the middle and an end, because that gives me the opportunity to leave different than how I came. And if you don't have time, then change becomes a real challenge. There is no then and now. And so we incarnate as humans on this plane, in this three-dimensional plane that has time specific, so that we can address, and we choose a life that gives us the greatest opportunity to address the aspects of ourselves that we hope to change. And then if we don't change, then typically we find that that opportunity continues to present itself. And you know, that can be seen as like part of this cycle that we find ourselves in, including like a reincarnation cycle. But I just felt like that was an interesting part. I'm not trying to figure out whether time exists or not. I do think that we only have 15 minutes, or now 10. But yeah, and if I can just throw one last thought out, you know, there was a talk with Pat, I think, right before he left, and there's a phenomenon that I see so often, which is that shaman have faith. That's how I describe it. You know, that knowing, you know, that we all have probably had, but shaman have this faith in, and it's a faith that applies to other people. A shaman knows that you will be healed, even if you don't know or believe or think you will be healed. A shaman knows you will be healed. And to me, the science of what that shamanistic tradition is about is how that faith, their faith, influences your consciousness to such a degree that eventually you also know that you will be healed. And at that time, at that moment, you are healed. And that's really kind of like how I view it. So I do think that there really is a tremendous power when you have a faith, when you have a knowing, and it does have the ability to influence people to that knowing. But I agree also in his comment that it's about like being and not so much like communicating, although all of it is really wrapped up together.
It's amazing. Mark, I want to know what you think about this.
Well, I've thought about this a lot over the last few years. Well, time is the idea of past to present to future is how I think about time from a traditional sense, that there was something that happened before, there's a present moment, and then there's something that will happen in the future. All of those occur within our consciousness. So when we think about the present, when we think about the past, It is a memory that's occurring in our consciousness in the present moment. And when we think about the future, it's also a thought, it's an idea in our consciousness in the present moment. So just based on our experience alone, in terms of the way that we're able to perceive and interpret our own experience, past to present to future sequential time does not actually exist. Or we can't prove that it exists. It's an inference. It might exist, but we don't know if our memory is accurate. We're just, it seems very compelling that something happened 5 seconds ago, but really that's a thought in the present moment. So the way I think about time, and to Mira's question about how does it relate to consciousness, the way I view consciousness is that it's our sense of experiencing. And if we're experiencing in the present moment, so time is sort of like the vessel of the experience of consciousness, it's highly intertwined with it. And I view also consciousness to be something that's even beyond space and our traditional view of time. So they're all interconnected to me.
Hell yeah.
I love both of those answers.
I know.
honestly.
I love bringing this to everyone.
From this context and like the spatial terminology attachment reference point, it's interesting. There's a group, and I may be saying them incorrectly, but from Peru, they're called the Amara, who believe that time, like that past, present, future context, the past is in front of you to them because it's already known and you've seen it. So it would have to be in front of you because you have eyes in the front of your head. This is their logic for their perception, their spatial terminologic, awareness of time, and that the future is actually what's behind you because you have yet to see it. You can guess, you can have a sense of what it will be, right? Like just how someone can walk up behind you in a room and you can have a sense or an intuitive moment that you think you know who that person is, and you may align with it and be correct. But it's just sort of, these are really fascinating things to me because it kind of plays into that whole idea that we are all actually, there is a sense that there is collective time, but also not collective time, because each one of us is having our own individuated perception of time. And that time is real to us because we believe in it as a conscious individuation. And so there are like infinite, the irony being that there is an infinite number of ways for time to present itself because time is infinite, right? The paradox, of course. But it's just sort of interesting from the context of everyone's always trying to like, same thing with consciousness is with time, is that people have a tendency to want to like figure out the answer that works for everyone. And I'm sitting here like, how do we just figure out the why of it for us and express that and, embody that, time included within the context of consciousness? It's like fascinating to me that I can experience a totally different version of time than someone else based on the language they speak or their understanding of the awareness of even, whether or not time is, this sort of time is real. Because there are actually a lot of people in the world who don't even believe that this sort of time is real, even though this is the time that we as people have a tendency to run our life around.
I think what you're saying is really fascinating. And it reminds me, Mira, of what I believe Einstein said, that time is relative. So if you're sitting on a hot stove, like if you ever got burnt as a kid, and it's like a nanosecond that you were there, it feels like it was like an hour, so, but compare that to, I think he used the example of if you're a teenager and you're newly in love and you spent the entire day with someone and it feels like it's 5 minutes,
Yeah.
So it's relative. And then
it's subjective, right? To Einstein's point, which goes into that whole concept of the archetypal, right? Because subjectivity or objectivity is conscious, subconscious. Subjectivity is a subconscious connotation within consciousness. So time would have to be a subconscious experience. If we made it highly conscious, sort of a bigger problem, solution.
But along that line, so there's the concept, and I go back to this whole idea of torsion physics, that we're all in this field together, and that we have, our aura is a torsion field, and our memory is not in our head, like you're saying, Mark, too, right? Where it's not in our brain, it's in the field, Irvin Lascaux's interconnected universe as well. And if you look at the research coming out of Russia, and that's in some of the suppressed declass information on our country, is that when you look at these fields and you look at this spinning vortex of energy. That's what torsion is. It's spinning. It's the spin, actually, that is at the most elementary level of matter. And there is no past and present. And what the Monroe Institute was talking about in this gateway process document, that they can actually teach people through this binaural beats and accessing an altered state of consciousness to change the past. They can actually change the past. So it's not just viewing future events and then altering it, but it is also changing the past. So it becomes the only thing that is real is the present. Everything else is up for grabs. And if we learn how to use the capability that our minds are, that is really inside of us, that is possible, we can affect our own consciousness. And then if you get a group of people together, like in the transcendental meditation studies, where a whole group of people were on the same, meditation, and they changed the crime rate in a city. If you get people together that are focusing on something, you can shift the consciousness of an entire, city or area. So yeah, it's fascinating.
100%. This is what it's all about, and this is why we're doing this. We are getting folks together. We are talking about things like this, and this is why this is important. And you guys have actually given me a topic for another co-collective creative all about time, and we'll do that another time. So if you don't mind, we're going to wrap this one up, but if let's run around and let folks know where they can find you. I'm going to be linking all of this stuff just in your own words. Cannot thank you guys again enough, but Mira, where can folks find you?
So you can find me at moonandrune.com. That's my business website for my integrative therapy services, but there's also loads of free resources on there, including links to other websites and, places like the Nag Hammadi online library and things of that nature, as well as just blog posts and writings that I've done. And you can also find me on Instagram at Mira Taylor Wellness is my personal one, or at Moon and Rune Wellness for my business account.
Hell yeah. Brent Rains, where can they find you, brother?
All right. I'm actually, I got an online magazine. It comes out the first of each month, Alternate Perceptions, and you can go to apmagazine.info, and we have interviews and articles, and we have different news links and things, and interviews. And I also am on Facebook at Brent Rains, or Alternate Perceptions page on Facebook as well. So
great page, great magazine. You do some incredible work. I cannot recommend your book enough. All y'all's books, by the way. And Dr. Jenny, I didn't even mention your book. It's a tongue twister. Will you tell everybody what it is? I don't have a physical copy of it. Apologies. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's about mystical Christianity and the evolution of the soul, really, but it's through sexuality, sacred sexuality. It's about Jesus. So that is, it's linked up on my site. So on my site is drgnnymartin.com.
Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, in the show, our description for the RSS feed, because it wouldn't fit on any other things for our episode, I believe, is something about expanded consciousness and Jesus and Mary and the Beast in two backs. So, Lynn, what's up? Where can we find you?
You can find me on Facebook, and there's also a website that's connected to our book that's called extraordinaryexperiences.org. And we have quite a few blog articles that are, related to out of body, near-death experiences, all kinds of stuff.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is so cool. Carlos.
Yeah, you can find me at ayahuascafoundation.org. And yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much as well. Mark Gober, man, where can they find you, brother?
You can find me at my website, markgober.com, markgober.com. My books are on Amazon. They're on Kindle, Audible, and hard copies. And my podcast, Where Is My Mind, is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major players.
Perfect. Again, cannot thank everybody for listening. Cannot thank this incredible panel. I love you guys so much. I'm just smiling. I'll get this shit-eating grin on my face the entire time because of how awesome this was. Again, everybody don't hang up if you want to hang out for just a few minutes. But for those of you listening, I'm going to leave you with this. We're talking about time. We're talking about consciousness and the perception of it. Could this entire thing be one big life review that you just constantly live over and over and over? And how can you prove that it's not? We'll see you next time, guys. Thank y'all for listening.